What if you could grow your investments by 45% in the next 3 years? And with that, we're talking about the two most powerful dividend-paying stocks that we're talking about a lot in the community, and that is JEPI and SCHD. I'm going to call JEPI JEPI from this point forward. Now, I recently received this comment right here asking about SCHD versus JEPI. Both pay great dividends, but what are the differences? Well, you know what? You ask a great question, and you're going to get a video response. So here is this video response to this great question. So when you're considering the differences between ETFs that pay great dividends, there's a lot of things you need to consider between the investment strategies, the expenses, and the total return. And we're going to look at all three of these in this video. But just because we're calling it JEPI versus SCHD does not mean that it has to be one or the other. You could do whatever you want. So let's first talk about JEPI. What it does to generate its dividends is by investing in U.S. large cap equities and selling options through covered calls to boost income potential. Look at this right here. Right here you have the yield of dividends. That's represented by the blue bar, 7, 15, 16, 11, and so on. And then the yellow indicates the premium based on options. Now, if you're not familiar with covered call options, I'll link a video that you can watch after this one to really understand covered call options and how they generate all the money that they make based on this particular method. So you're getting dividends from all of their holdings, but on top of that, because they're selling those covered calls, that's how they can increase to this 11.45%. 12-month rolling dividend yield. Very attractive. 11% dividend yield is absolutely awesome. And right off the bat, if you compare that to SCHD, there's two things. One, JEPI pays monthly dividends. Every single month, you're getting a paycheck from JEPI. And not only are you getting paid monthly by JEPI, it's an 11% dividend yield. Then you look at something like SCHD, and you're like, oh, well, you get paid quarterly. So every 3 months, you're going to get paid instead of every month. And the dividend yield percentage is only 3.64%. So right off the bat, it almost makes it like, well, this isn't a conversation. Why are we talking about this? Run to JEPI because it has a higher dividend yield and it pays you monthly. I mean, you can't go wrong with that, right? Hold on, because it gets very interesting as we put these against each other on charting that we'll do in just a moment. Now, the strategy of SCHD, a little bit different. What it does is it focuses on high dividend-paying U.S. stocks and tracks the performance of the Dow Jones U.S. Dividend 100 Index. So all of the companies in SCHD are based on dividends. In fact, they have a great metric system to basically qualify every stock that gets put into the holdings of SCHD. Looking at their dividend yield, their dividend payout, their dividend history. If you want to learn more about the specifics of the requirements to be included in SCHD, check out my SCHD dedicated video, which I'll link down in the description below. But we're talking about SCHD being a more traditional dividend-focused ETF that does not rely on option strategies at all, whereas JEPI does. Now, expense ratios are important because how you calculate that is you pull up your handy calculator right here and you plug in whatever your portfolio value may be. Let's say you're a big dog and you put $10,000 into one of these funds. Here's how you calculate it. You do $10,000, right? So here I have $10,000. What you do is you multiply that by the expense ratio. We'll look at SCHD first. Right here you can see it on Seeking Alpha at 0.06%. That's a percentage, not a decimal. That's like pennies, right? But in $10,000, you multiply it by that 0.06%. I'm going to click on percent, and that will convert this into an actual decimal. There's the decimal that gives me how much this costs every year. So if you have a $10,000 portfolio, you're only going to be paying $6 measly in expense. That's not that bad. JEPI, on the other hand, has a little bit of a higher expense ratio. You can see right over here in Seeking Alpha is 0.35%. Same calculation. You plug in $10,000 or whatever your portfolio investment is on this particular fund. You multiply it by that 0.35, hit the percentage, and then hit equals. You're going to be paying $35 for every $10,000 you have invested into JEPI. And that's how you calculate the expense ratio. So yeah, when you look at it this way, of course, SCHD wins the gold as far as the least amount of expense. The reason that's a little bit more expensive on JEPI is because it does have the options trading strategy. Because of that, it's a little bit more, costs a little bit more, and that's why you pay a little bit more. It's just the way it is. Now, the underlying holdings. Holdings mean how many companies make up the ETF. Great way to diversify because you hold potentially 100, 200, 5,000 different stocks depending on what the fund is. But when it comes down to JEPI and SCHD, JEPI focuses on US large cap equities, but the portfolio is actively managed. That's another reason the expense ratio is a little bit higher. But that means the fund's holdings can change more frequently because the fund managers make decisions about which stocks to include based on their analysis. SCHD is what we call a passively managed index fund. Makes it a little bit easier. That's why the expense ratio is cheaper. And SCHD's holdings are more diversified across sectors as it seeks to invest in high dividend-paying stocks across the market. And you can look at this yourself if you go over to Seeking Alpha. If you go over here to holdings, for example, on JEPI, you click on that. It does a great job showing you the sectors that really is made up of the fund. So in this case, there's 14% in technology funds. You got 14% in healthcare, all the way down to energy, which only has 2.79%. We do the same thing with SCHD and we click on holdings. You can then see that it's a little bit higher in industrials. In fact, technology only makes up 11.76% of this fund. That's something to keep an eye on and a great way to kind of look at, even when it comes down to overall investing strategy for ETFs, are you diversifying within the different sectors? You could go out and buy a bunch of ETFs that all focus on high tech, but then basically all you're doing is buying a bunch of high tech. What if you could look at diversifying even within the ETF? That's something to consider. And this is a great tool to use. Look in the holdings and look at that breakdown to make sure you're getting a wide variety of the entire market. But the moment you've all been waiting for is, what's the big difference? We've talked about the fact that if you look at only the dividend yield, JEPI wins. If you look at only the expense ratio, SCHD wins. If you look at the holdings, it's kind of a moot point because it is what it is. But what about money? Let's get down to money. If the next 3 years is like the last 3 years, what could we expect? Now, remember, we don't have a crystal ball, so I can't sit here and say to you that it's exactly going to happen what we're looking at. We can only look at the past. We cannot look at the future. I wish we could, because imagine the millionaires, the billionaires we would be if we could look into the future, but whatever. So let's go over to charting. This is the most fun thing I enjoy doing on these videos, and I hope you enjoy it. So right here we can see we have JEPI and we have SP 500 in the last year. Of course, the S&P 500 has been down, JEPI's been down, everything's been down. The stock market has been crap over the last year, and we understand that. Here we are on SCHD. I'm going to hit compare, and here's the difference. Now, right off the bat, you would say, oh wow, it paints a little bit of a different picture. Because, in fact, I'm going to remove the S&P 500, and we're just going to compare apples to apples when it comes down to what we're talking about in today's video. But look at this. So in the last year, on price return alone, JEPI dropped 8.55%, SCHD dropped 4.08%. So it looks like SCHD took less of a beating. If we look at the 3-year chart, wow, what a remarkable bloody difference. Look, SCHD returned 47%, whereas JEPI only returned a measly 10.45%. But wait, this isn't the right way to do it. If you're doing this and you're trying to compare some ETFs that you're interested in buying, there's a couple things you need to know. One, the price return is not the best way to do it. Because remember, these cats, they pay dividends. So I'm going to come back here to the 1 year, and we're going to change price return to total return. Total return includes all the dividends paid out. That's critical when you're looking at dividend-paying stocks or dividend-paying ETFs. I'm going to click on total return. Here's a little bit of a different picture in the 1 year. Now, in the 1 year, JEPI's kicking SCHD's butt. Boy, how the tables have turned in just a year. Let's take a look at 3 years. Now, 3 years, again, paints an even better story for SCHD, though. Because now you're looking at, sure, JEPI is now up 43. That's good. But now SCHD's kicking butt at 63% return. Whoa! That's incredible. And that's an important thing to think about. Because remember, SCHD is not only focused on the dividends, it's focused on the overall return. That's a huge difference, right? Because, you could be attracted by that 11% yield and just immediately blindly follow just one path, but then you have SCHD that actually returns better. Now, this is not a dig on JEPI. I'm not saying, oh, well, just because of this, go out and get a bunch of SCHD. It's just interesting to look at the history. There's another thing you need to keep in mind when you're doing your charting, though. Not only do you want to do total return, you also want to look at your charting when it comes down to when these funds actually were developed. See, here's the problem. JEPI didn't come around until May-ish of 2020. So that's when that fund was developed. So even in that case, it's a little unfair because we're looking at 3 years and SCHD has been around a lot longer than that. If I go to the 5-year chart, see what happens? JEPI only picks up when it actually starts being formed. So I can't come here to the 5-year chart and say, well, SCHD at 78% and JEPI's only at a measly 43. That's not an accurate comparison, let alone the fact of the 10-year and the maximum, which would make JEPI just look ridiculous. But that's why I will only max this out at 3 years. The key point will be what happens over the next couple of years. What happens during some more economic trouble? What happens during economic excitement? Where do these funds trend? But again, like I said, this isn't a dive on either one of them. This is all part of your best strategy that you got to do your own research on to make the best dividends. And here's a great way to do it. What if you could take all of those high-paying dividends from JEPI, instead of reinvesting them back into JEPI with dividend reinvestment program, you create a dividend waterfall. And you basically take those dividends from JEPI and you put them into SCHD to build your position in SCHD. Now, you're making all this money with JEPI dividends and you're building up a portfolio in SCHD and well, here's how you can learn how to do that in this video representing the dividend waterfall strategy. We'll see you on the next video.